everybody for being here. It's just such a cool, awesome pleasure to be in such an intimate setting. I'm Dave. I'm a former pro poker player turned office leasing agent turned enabler of hybrid work. And the main thing I really believe in is that the future of work can make a massive contribution to the future of living. That's the thing I'm super passionate about. We are here with an incredible panel. We have two global heads of real estate and workplace from massive companies, IBM, JPMorgan, respectively. We have the only reasonable person during the hype cycle of co-working that is still standing, Jamie Hodari. Jamie, just super quickly, on We Crash, did you wear that outfit the way that it was portrayed or no? And it's totally cool if you did, I'm just curious.
The context is there was a TV show called We Crashed on Apple TV, and there was a character named Jamie Hodari. They didn't even call it Hamey Jodari. And Jamie Hodari wore a old-timey magician's vest in every single episode, as if every day I wake up and we're like, I want to dress like it's 1871 and I'm about to blow people's minds. No, I don't dress like that. I'm a little nerdy, but I don't know why they did me that dirty.
Cool. And then we have Rex Miller, who calls himself a modern elder, and I can fundamentally agree. I normally get triggered by elders, and he doesn't trigger me at all. So this is an amazing panel, and I'm here to, try to facilitate something that hopefully is a little bit different than, the boring conversation or maybe the stale conversation we've all been experiencing lately. When the pandemic hit, we all reacted. We reacted in every area of our lives. But to tug on the nerd thing, I'm going to get there, Jamie, in a second. In the world of workplace, it was like a knee-jerk reaction. I was a real estate broker at the time, and every deal I was working on died on the operating table instantaneously. And companies like CBRE were saying things were going to return in a matter of weeks because we were all just completely terrified of what the implications of this could be. I was talking to one of my nerdy internet-based friends, Phil Kirshner, wherever he is, yesterday, and he remarked to me, that we're being a little bit dramatic here with this reference, so take it with a grain of salt, but we remarked that 99% of people in the workplace world were like, oh my God, please get me out of this. And then 1% bubbled up for air and we're like, oh, this is kind of cool. Like all the nerds kind of coalesced on LinkedIn and we've all made such interesting connections with each other that we wouldn't have necessarily otherwise made. But to me, two things that really stood out about the pandemic is that digital transformation happened in a matter of weeks that would maybe taken years or decades for companies like yours. Like we flipped the script in a way that I don't think anybody could have anticipated. And we entered each other's not only homes, but lives in a way that I don't think, again, any of us could have predicted. We stayed productive, people stayed connected, and family got prioritized. It was like an unprecedented experiment that none of us could have ever really imagined the implications of. And it became a top 5 conversation globally, and that I think is also just insane. But of course, things started to bubble up. How we measure productivity, culture, engagement started to become very, very tense. The debates on LinkedIn turned into bun fights. New companies keep bubbling up, even to today, trying to return to the past. And there's just confusion around what data we can even trust. It's just this giant shade of gray thing. And I thought of like this parenting example. It's like you could try and read every parenting book under the sun, but every kid is different. There really ultimately isn't a playbook in so many respects, and I think that's the hard thing to navigate. And Rex, when I was talking to him preparing for this session, brought up the fact that this is not a data moment, this is a storytelling moment. And that really, really resonated with me because I think that any story that any of us or any employee or anyone can and wants to tell is a valid story, and I think we need to pay attention to that, maybe a little bit more than we're paying attention to the data. And so I want to tell some stories today. Let's tell some stories about how tech adoption in new ways is shaping new ways of working, how we're getting the dosing right between remote and in-office work, stories about how maybe we're bringing the workplace to the worker, and I really hope Jamie can touch on that rather than the other way around. And some stories about how the physical workplace can actually connect us in a meaningful way to each other and the mission that we're chasing in whatever company we're working for. Because I think in many respects, that's the way the workplace is changing. So to kind of transition here, the goal from my perspective, guys, is to get you each to tell your own version of a story along an arc of this conversation in terms of like where we were, where we are, and how we might navigate where we're going next. And then I'd love to open it up to some conversation with the group if we have time to do that as well. Does that sound good to everybody here? Okay, amazing. So I'm going to kick it off with Rex. Rex, I would love it if you could talk about the adoption curve for disruptive technology, if you could talk about the decline in empathy that we're experiencing at a societal level that has been massively expressed in the workplace and around the world since COVID happened. This notion of shadow culture, these unspoken behaviors that we have within organizations and again, society at large, and how all of that might be an impediment to new ways of working, just like in whatever way you want to talk about it, man.
5 minutes?
Yeah, 5
Oh
minutes.
my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, so rapid fire. The first one was?
We're going to go with the
Oh,
disruptive adoption curve, and I
Right.
can cue you up after that again.
So a colleague, a retired colleague, Jeffrey Wacker, was a EDS fellow, futurist, and EDS asked him to help develop a way to predict the next wave, going back from mainframe to PC, laptops, et cetera, et cetera. And what he found was something very interesting, that when a new transforming technology comes in, it's about 9 to 10 years of the technology stabilizing, then 9 to 10 years of socializing. Well, think of Zoom, 2011, Teams, 2017. We still don't have stable technology, and yet we're still trying. I think we're pushing or forcing the expectations beyond where we're at just in that adoption curve. And so Jeffrey Moore's book, Crossing the Chasm, is about a rate of adoption, that you've got your innovators, your early adopters, you've got the chasm, early majority. And what we're going to find, as a futurist, I'm going to predict this, is that those that their DNA is distributed are going to do fine. Like the GitLabs of the world and the other companies that were born in a distributed mode. Those that are technologically savvy have some chance of surviving. But for most companies, this is going to be their Kodak moment, where they missed the curve. Because their structures, think of decision-making in the distributed world, their structure, it's a different structure altogether. So command and control doesn't work in distributed world. So that's where I think we are there. And then the empathy, it was interesting research, because very early on, I was wondering, well, what's going to be the impact of all this screen? My undergrad is in what's called media ecology, understanding the landscape of different medias. And Zoom or virtual does some things extremely well, but it strips out other things, like all the nonverbal communication. And research started in the 1970s on empathy in college students, and they found that in the last 40 years, it's dropped 40%, and then empathy dropped another 20% during the pandemic. So in this historic moment, and think of what empathy is. It's the mirror neuron, my ability to put myself in your shoes, see the world the way you are, suspend my judgment, and enter into a rhythm of dialogue. We're losing that tremendously. And so now it's an interesting question. And companies are wrestling with, the value of bringing people in and how do we balance flexibility. I think we're 3 to 4 years away from even getting any kind of rhythm in that. But I do have a concern, and we're going to see it this November. And there's another trade show just before the election. In their wisdom, they decided that we'll be in Washington, D.C. right before the election. What could go wrong with that? But we're seeing it play out every day. So the real concerning question is how do we encourage and get that face-to-face so that we can suspend judgment, get in somebody else's shoes. High-performing teams have to have positive conflict. The number one thing I'm usually called into for teams that can't perform is they can't have healthy conflict. It's either passive-aggressive or over the line. So I think we're in for interesting times, and I don't have to worry about employees or workplace or portfolios. So I get to watch from the sidelines and then sit here and think about what does that mean?
Yeah, I love it, Rex. And I actually just listened to a podcast last week about this whole empathy and connection issue. And this quote from Dr. Alok Kenji really stands out to me. it says, the parts of our brain that reassure us in social situations are starting to atrophy. Like it's like a failing muscle.
Yeah.
So like before I pass off to the rest of the group here, maybe do a little bit of response and move on to our next section, like as I bring that up to you and we think of this also this idea of like shadow culture or like our unspoken agreements or behaviors, be that virtually or in person, like this is really complicated shit. And like how do we deal with the fact that 4 to 5 workers were already distributed, they already were before the pandemic. Like the idea of everybody being able to come together on one roof in most large organizations is a fallacy. So how do we deal with this and have the workplace enable people to have stronger social muscles?
Yeah, so I like to define culture is it's what happens when you're not there. So whatever behavior happens when you're not around to manage, it's the invisible values that you have, the habits that form, the attitudes people have, and the behaviors they display. So just think of what's happened, and there's 4 cultures in every organization at one time. There's your aspired culture, your mission, vision, values. That's what you want to be. Your legacy culture, what got you here but may hold you back getting forward. Your future travelers or outliers, people who are demonstrating a new way of working that could be positive but usually leave or quit. And then shadow culture, the stuff that when you poke it, when you move somebody, you find out who feels entitled or what the invisible values really are. We're at this interesting moment where whatever culture you thought you had no longer exists. Because I didn't know what I was missing by being home at dinner, having spontaneous conversations in the neighborhood. Now I value that. And everyone has gone through a different value reset. Companies haven't even begun to consider, well, what is the real underlying value that holds us together, that ties us together? So that'll be an interesting conversation.
I dig it. All right, well, I'm looking at our clock, and because I want to make sure we have audience participation, I want to move to Jamie, and I think it actually dovetails nicely. So like, I want to discuss this whole notion of family at work, and I'm going to respectfully call out my previous employer, CBRE. At least in Canada, we like to refer to ourselves as the CBRE family. And it made me literally want to puke in my mouth every time I heard it, because it was just total bullshit. So what I would love to discuss is that notion, Jamie. Like, are we a family at work? I think I kind of just answered that question, and I know we don't. I know we share the same point of view. So are we more like a family, or are we more like a high-performance sports team? And in that vein, like, are we living actually, we talk about like a lot of the challenges right now, but like, is this maybe one of the best opportunities for employees to be able to align with like the right culture, the right organization, and figure out like what meshes for them in that regard? And kind of based on your answer, like family versus sports team, how does this actually change the workplace strategies that we deploy? And how does Industrious see its place in all of this?
Let me start by saying CBRE owns 40% of Industrious. So I don't know if I can say it's total bullshit. I love the family.
I'm no longer there. So. And it's a good company, but I just think that notion.
I totally get it. And let me actually, 2 quick things on Rex's point. Number 1, the book Crossing the Chasm, huge recommend. It's nominally a sales book, but it is about that. If I were running workplace at any company, it would be a Bible for me of how you sort of get people who are facing something new to sort of understand within an organization who the early adopters are, who is going to resist. And then on your point on empathy and the sort of mirror neuron, I imagine you guys think I'm going to be up here to basically shill, you should all be using Flex. But in the end, I really do feel like among the large Flex providers, we really view ourselves as a outsourced workplace provider. And as a result, I basically wake up every day and do the same thing you guys are doing. How do we build great workplaces that people want to come to? And we have a big corporate team that I have to decide what are our policies related to when they have to come in, where they have to come in. So as far as this conversation goes, I feel like I'm sitting in the same seats as you in a lot of ways. The way I view it is almost like a college. Like for me, in high school, you basically you have to go to the same 400-person place every day. You sit in the same seat every day, and you're trying to build a sense of community and a sense of affiliation with the school in this very rigid 5-day-a-week way. Then you go to university, and there's a greater diversity of types of universities. And I actually used to work in higher education, which is why maybe this is where my mind goes, even more than sports team or family. And there's basically, tight campus schools. There's University of Wisconsin, where you're never going to meet all the other kids in your class. And there are pure online universities. So the graduation rate for in-person universities is somewhere between 60 and 90%. Does anyone want to guess for a pure online, let's say University of Phoenix, the biggest of the pure online universities, what the graduation rate for University of Phoenix is? 8%.
Well, it's like taking those you get an online course, right? You buy a course, you never take it.
Right.
You just don't do it.
It's just hard, and I think about that with trying to build an institution and a place people want to be. It's really hard with something that's purely distributed. But at a university, I think most people feel more connected to their college than they necessarily did to their high school, even though you'll never meet all the other University of Wisconsin students, even though you might hang out with the kids in your dorm who you're going to be friends with for life, and you don't even care that much about the other anthropology majors, but the thing that makes you feel connected to Wisconsin are the people outside of your class hours. And I view sort of right now running a company as you've got to feel connected to the company you're at. And you've got to feel like this is an institution I feel loyalty to. This is an institution I feel part of. And being with some cluster of your colleagues is a very good way to do that. But I think it works when you're with your Denver colleagues and you might be on the marketing team and the marketing team experience is distributed. There's 2 people in DC, 10 in San Francisco, but at least I've got my cluster of JPMorgan Denver people who on the all company call, I can go to lunch with them after and be like, what just happened? How are we processing this? And building that sort of affiliation. So that's kind of my broad sense, the metaphor that I feel the most connected to right now in running an institution. And I think maybe we can get to later, why would someone want to come in and be around those colleagues? But ultimately, different companies are going to pick different cultures, and you're going to have to pick, just like with maybe a sports team or whatever, employees are going to pick the kind of institution they want to be at, with the culture they want to be at, with the set of policies they want to be at. And I do think it's hard when you're running a workplace for a 100,000 person company to say I've got to be everything to everyone. But over time, I think different people will choose to be whatever it is, a sports forward school, a fun school, a very brainy school, and the same thing happens with companies. And then people will self-sort into the set of policies or the institution that feels like it mirrors kind of their own heart most closely.
I love it, Jamie, and I actually totally forgot the investment thing for a second when I made that comment up front. But just to clarify, what I mean is, you just answered it. Like, an institution is a better term, and to be feeling connected to that institution and that you're part of it. But I don't expect my colleagues to have my back in the same way that my family members do. I think that's a very unrealistic expectation. But to feel connected to, an institution makes a ton of sense to me. I love that answer. You did just tug on it a bit, but before we move to the next person, I believe in this idea of how can we bring the office to people rather than people to the office in whatever context we can. And Industrious has morphed its growth strategy to some extent to reflect that. Is that accurate? How do you see that proposition?
In the US, that's in our Asia and Europe business, we mostly still grow in big CBDs. In the US, it used to be 70% were in big CBDs, 30% were in neighborhoods. And it is true for the last 4 years, about 70% of our new launches have been in Coconut Grove or Lower Highlands in Denver, and about 30% have been in big office towers downtown. And it is, I guess very quickly to connect it to the panel. What is a people-first workplace? It's hard to make business decisions and serve many masters. And you can make decisions in favor of the CEO lives in Greenwich, so let's put the headquarters in Stamford. Or you can say, I want the most impressive One Vanderbilt building because when we meet clients, I want it to wow them. And I just think at some fundamental level, people-first workplace would be a workplace where the primacy, the fundamental decisions get made for the associate director of performance marketing who has to come in every day or some set of days every week. What matters to them? What's going to move them? what are they going to feel engaged by? And I think right now what I see is we are all getting pulled inward. It's just like, it's TikTok, it's Netflix. You want to go to the little jazz concert in the park near you. You want to go have an after work drink with your friends, but there are a lot of people who have a lot of money at stake in kind of keeping you on your couch. And so I think one of the things I love about Workplace is it can be one of the only conduits. It gets you out your front door. And now once you're out there, you're more likely to join the book club for your community. You're more likely to go to the jazz concert in your park. And therefore, I am kind of attracted to these neighborhood offices where it's all the Lower Highlands, Denver employees, because then the workplace can do double duty. It's both a place to hang out with your colleagues, but it's the thing that connects you into the sort of place you chose to live and can kind of be the thing, the conduit to connecting you to your community. And I see that a lot. People love that. I think hub and spoke models are very hard to do. I'm not here to advocate that every company should have 11 offices in the New York area. It's a huge pain in the ass. But if you can pull it off, it's a very special thing.
I'm going to give Jamie one more 60-second thing. There's a lot of folks in here that are also trying to solve for on-demand real estate strategies, Jamie. Everything from remote workers having a place to go and leave the house on an ad hoc, on-demand basis, through to, like, I just talked to a company formed in 1930 that flipped to 75% remote as a result of the pandemic. And they're now trying to actually have it be a gathering exercise of like booking a conference room for like literally half a day. I see this stuff just happening around the edges still within large organizations. They're not really investing heavily in on-demand. I know you have an investment in DeskPass. Kadence is partnered with LiquidSpace, who's here. What is your philosophy on the future of on-demand?
I think this is our fault, not your guys' fault. It's true. We own 40% of DeskPass. We bought Breather. Industrious has lots of, and I just think our industry is scrambling to create the sort of set of products, the way of talking about those products, the way of buying those products that feels super seamless and really easy. And maybe other people who are in this space would disagree with me, but I just think, like, if today I said I want an HQ for a day every Tuesday in Midtown Manhattan, and I want that same provider to give me 2 summer camps a year to gather all of our Northeastern employees, and I want to pay per use every time a guest wants to visit a spoke location, the math would be very hard to do. It would be hard to go to your CFO and even explain what the predicted cost would be at the end of the year. The technology wouldn't be that seamless. So I kind of feel like I would want lots of on-demand solutions if I were head of Workplace, and I would feel like, it feels like we're 3 years away from like someone being able to provide that bundle of services in a way that makes sense for me and that I could seamlessly buy and enjoy buying versus like rue my life for having to navigate this very complicated palimpsest of products and sort of subscriptions.
Okay, cool. Yeah, let's move to Federico. So Federico, we talked about some of the challenges that IBM is facing to get folks to return to the office. Yep. Which is, of course, a systemic issue. And then we talked about this like shower idea I had one day where I said, oh my God, there's no office amenity more valuable than the choice to go there or not. Sarah's in the audience, I could see her. We talked about that yesterday. I'm going to reframe this, Sarah, okay? I think that there's no office amenity more valuable than the team's ability to figure that out. If we want to actually be like, what's the word? Thinking of the greater good, it's got to involve the team, not just the individual. So, you know, I kind of look at it and go like, teams are saying, we want to decide what works for us, not what Andy Jassy at Amazon says works for him. And so in your view, like how does the workplace respond in the near term to continuing to grapple with this tension? And like, has your philosophy changed at all around what an office even is and what its primary function or functions should be for a really large organization like IBM? Like, just give us everything you got.
Okay. So for start, a little bit about my background. I'm actually from Brazil. I was leading IBM in Brazil in 2017, then Latin America, and then I moved here, hence the weird accent. And lack of vocabulary. So it's good because sometimes if I don't like the question or I don't know the answer, I can always say, I'm not understanding. What was your question again? No, I'm kidding. So yeah, we have not only IBM, I'm assuming, but we have a huge challenge on people coming back to the office, and we are committed with a lot of space, not only own space, but also a lot of leases. So we actually had not recently, 6 months ago, the mandatory request to managers and executives to come back to the office. And even then, we still have low utilization in most of our locations. And to your point, we tried everything. We tried free amenities. We tried food trucks, lectures, you name it. And it's a struggle because during the pandemic, we praised our technology and we praised that we were still productive at that point in time.
Yeah.
And now we are telling the team basically to come back because of culture and because of productivity. On the other hand, they have more time with their family. If they work from home, more time, less commuting time or no commuting time, and it's more environmental friendly. So there's a bunch of reasons here that's hard to try to fight it. And to my point earlier, even the productivity, it's debatable. So now what we are thinking is not exactly giving the team or the employee the choice to come back, but what we should do at our offices that will actually bring him willingly to the office. Because today the balance, it's unbalanced. So I think it's broader than a real estate discussion. We are now partnering with marketing, HR, and even the business units themselves, because if you're coming to the office to be productive, what you should have there, not only in terms of the layout itself or the building, or technology, but should the clients be there as well? Should we partner with our clients to actually be productive and meeting face-to-face with them, and all executives not having dedicated offices anymore and mingle with the team there, so it's an opportunity for you to talk with your leadership. So we just inaugurated an office in New York. That it's a consolidation of 15 locations that we had in Manhattan. And aside from the CEO, everything it's open space. And executives will sit with everyone else. But fun fact is that people are actually coming because it's a brand new office. We expect to have the spike and then utilization will, if we don't do nothing, will actually decline. But if you look at auditorium reservation, the book of auditorium, it is fully booked until 2027. So
yeah, wow.
It's a different perspective. So if I go to our offices right now, workstations are empty, meeting rooms are full. Mm-hmm. So maybe we should rethink also on how to design those offices, because they are going there for a different purpose. They're not going there just to... During the pandemic, the teams changed as well. Not only you learned to work from home and the technology helped, but also the teams get scattered all over the place. So maybe your employees are now in different states, in different countries. So you go there and you stay the whole day with your headset, just talking with them. What's the purpose for you to go to the office at the end of the day if you're not connecting with real people?
I love it. I want to connect this actually again back to the flexible office world, because you touched on a number of areas that make flexible office real estate very compelling. We can bring it to people easier. We can help the planet by being more efficient with it. We can cost savings and de-risking ourselves. You're both customers of Industrious. And I'm just wondering, like when I talk to corporate occupiers like you all, your offices are cultural shrines. They're the place that you come to gather, and like that physical space has a real manifestation on defining that culture. That seems to be some of the tension in really doubling down and getting Industrious to operate your event space for you or something like that, rather than you doing it yourself. And then I look at the world around us and I see us leaning into on-demand and sharing economies everywhere else in our life, whether it's ride sharing, groceries being delivered to us, like everything instant or shareable. Like, how does that tension get resolved for the betterment of all stakeholders, so that real estate doesn't sit dormant all the time and we bring it to people more, and all the benefits of maybe not owning and operating all of our space all the time. And Marisa, if you have something you want to jump in on here too, I'd love to hear it before we give you the mic.
Yeah, I think we have a stance on how we want to bring people back, and we have had probably less of an issue than maybe other companies. So, it's meaning people are occupying our spaces, but given that, I think we've doubled down on really focusing in on the employee experience and making sure that we're not only looking at it from like a physical, but also from the digital. So I know you had mentioned, I was thinking as you were saying, Rex, we just tested out like center of table cameras where we're actually providing meeting equity for those people who are at home and those who do come into the office, so that way you can see, how people are reacting. Usually when you're at a big conference room table and you're like, oh, I wasn't there, but at least it helps them have that equity. So we're really focused in on improving, because we have been able to bring people back in, and we do want to make that commute worthy. And I think as we continue, like the employees are seeing that we're kind of putting where our money's at, in the sense that, we've developed a whole entire employee experience organization at the firm to work on ways to, again, bring HR, technology, and what would typically be, the real estate organization together to think about like everything that the employee experiences in the workplace.
How, could you give me a pre-pandemic, post-pandemic example of like a really significant shift? Because I think the opportunity to hear from yourself is that you can bring some really practical boots on the ground, like I mean, you just you've got a new campus that's like super incredible, I'm sure. Was that project well underway before COVID?
It was, but I think the principles always, because at the beginning we always anchored on being flexible, we wanted to focus on sustainability, we wanted to increase our amenities and our whole hospitality, and because we had these anchor points, even though the COVID hit in the middle of that, it really just helped us double down on what our mission was always set up from the beginning. So I think that was important to do as part of that project.
And I think of trading floors, right, being so integral to big banks, and there is also a culture related to trading floors. And so if I zoom back out on what I see as JPMorgan, it's a 300,000+ organization. It's an incredibly varied organization. Like you think of trading floor people on one side versus I don't know what the other extreme is. Technologists, engineers, right? Like people who could go work at a tech company or whatever. And then these steeped cultural traditions, right? Like when you go to any major city around the world, you see big banking halls, this is part of our history in a post-industrial age. So it's how do you grapple with that?
I mean, I think in the practical sense, we've been looking at, through this employee experience organization, really looking at personas and user segments at the firm and how they individually work very different, and how are we going to individually look at all those groups and teams and be able to create spaces for them that have that uniqueness. And again, I think that is something that was done as part of our headquarters and is also then, pushed out into any campuses that we're building across the world.
It has one last thing on this before I maybe shift to a group question, actually, that I want to ask. I worked with a big institutional bank. I'm not going to name them because we're on camera. But they were already consolidating and downsizing quite a lot before COVID. And then if COVID did anything, it shifted that and made them want to consolidate and downsize even more. Is that a thing at a company like JPMorgan? Because if you look in the news, you go, no way.
I think just, again, saying our utilization rates are pretty high. Do we have pockets? Of course. And maybe they're some of the more suburban areas, or we're doing some more satellite offices and trying to diversify in that sense. But I think we doubled down on a lot of the cities that we were committed to. Chicago is another one, and all the other campuses that we're building around the world. It's less about the consolidation, and even more so now, I think the pandemic and some of those, I'll call it those user segment pain points that we've seen, is that employees like personal space. So we've also taken a look at, hey, if people have to come in 5 days a week, are we dedicating their own space to them? And so we might be doing stuff that are a little bit different than some other organizations versus going completely, unassigned seating and everybody, kind of you don't know what you're going to get when you get into the office. So those are some of the things that I think, and again, I recognize that is something that comes with a big firm like JPMorgan that might not be right for all other firms. But I think given that, then we also try to make sure that we are behind the employees and saying, yes, we're telling you should come in 5 days or 60% if you're a certain type of, but what are we going to do to help their experience and earn that commute?
And then last thing quick, is there anything, are you looking at load balancing at all, like trying to get occupancy across 5 days, or is that, it sounds like not really, because a lot of folks here are struggling with that. Like they're trying to find a way to not have Mondays and Fridays be dormant while still offering a lot of flexibility. And
I think we've really let our businesses, we've pushed it off to the businesses to come up with and organize their teams in the way that they may work.
Cool. Well, I did have one more question before doing some audience stuff, but if anybody has anything on this that they want to jump in on, I would leave it open.
I was going to answer the how do you outsource something to a third-party provider that's as dear as what does it feel like to walk into work every day as a Goldman Sachs employee or something like that. But if we're tight on time, we can.
No, go for it. We got 15 and a half minutes. Just, if you got take
okay,
40,
so very
45
quickly.
seconds.
Okay, 45 seconds. So what I would say is, so coming to conferences like this, it is complicated for me. Like I feel like it's a very fun group, and there are certain heads of workplace that I really feel like when we're talking, it's like an improv group. It's like yes, and others where I feel like we don't click as much. And I do think it comes down to this question of people first workplaces. There are just certain, JPMorgan is actually amazing at this, Spotify, Databricks, a lot of the people here where it's like, most of the conversation is what do the people who walk in every day want? And yes, we do have to talk about MSA pricing and is it single source invoicing or not or stuff like that. But I think sometimes that's all you end up talking about, and you never talk about what does it actually feel like for the employee. And I feel like if you're grounded in that, then I think that's the starting place for any conversation about using a third party for anything that's very near and dear to your heart. Because AirPods have more revenue than all of Netflix. They're just like a little earphone. Apple doesn't manufacture those. Foxconn manufactures. In fact, Foxconn manufactures the whole iPhone. Lots of companies that do big logistics, Amazon, et cetera, have to decide, do I use UPS, do I do it myself? And they're both valid, but I think they work really well when you start with a set of outcomes and you're like, I want my people to, love coming to work every day. I want my people to XYZ. So if I'm going to work with a third party, here's what I want to see. I want people to come in at least 3 days a week, unprompted, without being forced to. I want to know that my employee attrition rate is the same or lower in a third-party setting as it is and then hold the provider's feet to the fire. And if they pass the test, you do more business with them. And if it's like, you know what, the outcomes for my employees are worse when a third party or a partner does it for us when I do it myself, I'm just not going to do it anymore. That I think is the easiest way to outsource something very high value in the way that you look at all sorts of other industries, and people sometimes outsource things that are very central to this sort of survival of the business. You just have to know what the outcome is that you're holding them to, and then you have to actually hold them to it.
Awesome. Do we have any Gen Z in the crowd? It's a sad reality, right, of this whole thing. I said I wasn't going to talk about data, but I lied. I want to talk about greenwashing for a second. So 70% of Gen Z will only are considering companies based on their commitment to the environment, and 60% of them won't work for one that doesn't take it seriously. And everyone in this room can actually make some kind of an impact on that from one vantage point or another. And with commercial real estate being 40% of GHG emissions, it's a really important thing. And when I think of Gen Z, I'm like, I mean, as a millennial, I even feel it too. It's like we're holding the bag here, and we're going to be around for it. And I just want to discuss, like, Rex, I'm going to turn it back to you. Like, what do you think about this big, lofty subject, including the fact that Gen Z's not here, and we often talk on their behalf, as we're just about to do right now?
Well, you can only pick so many boil the ocean topics. And my boil the ocean topic is about health and well-being and the rise of chronic disease in our country. And the primary driver of chronic disease is stress. So if you can begin to reduce stress in the workplace, then people will rely less on the 4 negative coping behaviors for stress, which is smoking, drinking or drugs, binge watching, sedentary lifestyle, and comfort food. So chronic disease will bankrupt us before climate change will kill us. So that's my dive into the deep ocean. In the workplace, if you think about that, half the population goes to work, that's a big impact that you can do. So if you can just lower stress, and there's lots of ways to do that. So I don't want to dodge the
No, I think it's a
the green
unique
issue,
response.
but
yeah.
But it's rising at a 7% compounded rate, and it currently consumes 18% of GDP, just health costs, and 80% of health costs are chronic disease. So if I'm going to get on a high horse, that's my high horse.
If I can say one
Yeah, go
very
for it.
quick, simple thing on carbon footprint, greenwashing, etc. I grew up in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, a very boring suburb of Detroit with big lots, no sidewalks. I now live in Brooklyn. If I never recycled, left the lights on, if I could be the biggest, like the worst climate actor living in a dense place like New York, and my carbon footprint would still be about a quarter of what it was growing up in suburban Michigan. There's just no replacement for density and high utilization. And as a result, when sometimes we're filling out these EU forms of like, did you use PR61 sensors to make sure that, XYZ, and it just, that does sometimes feel like greenwashing to me, because there's just no way around the fact, if a company wanted to reduce its carbon footprint, having a thoughtfully sized real estate footprint that was relatively highly utilized, so they weren't heating and cooling lots of empty floors, would like dwarf anything else you could ever do. So I'm not saying shed space if people are using it, but I do think that would be the easiest way to make a big impact for any occupier in the world.
Federico, anything you'd love? I don't want to turn it to questions from the audience, but if anything jumps out at you on this issue.
Specifically for the environment, I think I agree with Jamie that we need to have a more intelligent portfolio. And that means basically shrinking today for most of the companies. I'm not saying that the company is shrinking. I'm saying that we will use the space differently and automatically saving the environment at the same time. So that's what we are trying to do, looking at our portfolio and saying we are focusing on one city. Maybe it's not 3 different offices, maybe it's just one, smaller footprint, but more intelligent layout.
I hope one day that we can use AI and say, like, I want to have a meeting with Federico, Marisa, Jamie, and Rex. Where is the best place? When's their calendar available, first of all? where's the best place to do it, and tell me what my environmental impact is going to be, whether I go to JPMorgan's office or I go to an Industrious in Brooklyn. Like that, to me, would be cool. And Kadence might get there, by the way. Yeah, okay, well, thank you guys so much for this. I would love to spend a few minutes inviting this audience to participate. Yeah.
Got a question here?
Thanks. So thank you for this. It's been really interesting. It's not part of the topic. It wasn't part of the conversation. But what I'm curious about is company values and people working for companies that have a mission and a vision that they are completely bought into. We come to work for the people. We don't come to work for the space.
Correct.
So how do you, and I'm curious about, a couple of you, your answer to this. How do you talk about people first workplace and company values? Like what the company outcomes, Jamie, we're talking about, like what are the outcome we're trying to achieve? What is the outcome the company is trying to achieve?
I feel like I've been talking a lot, so I don't. Does someone else want to? I mean, yeah.
Give it to Rex. What's your outsider perspective on this? We don't come to workplaces for the space. We come for the people.
Yeah.
And Sarah, by the way, works at Genentech and
Sure.
is helping
I know
my
Sarah.
daughter have medication for her epilepsy. So,
Yeah.
that's, I think, what you're
Well,
talking about right
and,
there.
and even more to the point, most people leave a company because of their direct manager. So it's the relational dynamics. And we spend a lot of time on strategy, but very little time on curating the culture, being intentional about culture, what it is. And it's very difficult. I'd like you all to look up on Wikipedia the word wicked problems, because that's the world we're in right now. And so there's no clear, we have to continually negotiate where we are in kind of a continuum of what's important to us now. So when you talk about values, what we're really saying is this is what's important to us. This is who is important to us. The clearer you can be on that at any given time, that gives you kind of a keel to everything that's bouncing around. But it's really hard because the stock market drives behavior too. And then your employees drive behavior. So it is a true wicked problem that needs to be at the forefront of every leader as to what do we stand for today, why, and continue to repeat it, model it, and yeah, it's tough.
All I would say on top of that is I don't think there's a distinction between the two. I would not knock the value of what we all do in this room. I don't think the values are the true heart of the heart and the space is secondary. I think they're completely intertwined. Like I actually think a lot of the evidence is that you're not more productive in the workplace, which is thinner. Like is making people more productive something we all want to get out of bed for every day? Maybe, maybe not. Companies have to decide what they want to be in the world and what types of values they're trying to inculcate in their employees and the types of interactions they're trying to, and then they need a platform to do it. And I think gathering together, like I'm Jewish and I tried to watch the Yom Kippur service streaming on Zoom because I was being lazy, and I was just so angry at myself. I didn't feel in any way connected to that moment. I didn't actually atone for anything because I was watching on Zoom, and I know if I had been there in person, I would have been surrounded by people, we would have been having a communal experience. And from a, religion, talk about values in a really deep way, it would have been a much more value-driven moment. And I see that, like there's no one answer. In industrious locations, especially in the South, we'll have ones where people want a gun locker because they want to bring guns to work. We have people who are like, that's the most horrifying thing I've ever seen. So there's not one answer, but these are all companies that are trying to figure out what are we about and what do we want to be in the world. And a lot of the way they navigate that is by getting together and sort of do the messy stuff in person. And that's part of, well, I'll stop.
Yeah,
Yes.
but look, we are trying to hire the best people in the world. So it would be impossible for us just to have all of them in a few locations, right? So we need to understand how can we better relate with the people that will work remotely anyway or will not be in direct contact with you. And coming back to my point earlier, I think the workplace then should be there for a business purpose. So what is this providing, this workplace is providing the benefit for the business itself, not only for hanging out with each other, etc. Because we need to learn how to do this in a online fashion as well.
Well said from a corporate real estate executive.
Look, don't, Marisa, know my boss. Don't tell her that I'm telling this here. But it's a struggle today because it's hard to compete. So that's why we are trying to focus on what the workplace can provide for the business. We are asking the employees, but at the end of the day, we need to ask the business and the clients also, because the clients need to be part of this conversation.
Yeah, Marisa, it sounds like you have something. We have 3 minutes left, and he's telling me James is saying we're tight to time. I want to make sure we get one more question at least. Do you want to jump in quick?
No, it's okay. We can go.
Hi. So, wow, that's loud. We know historically that one of the strongest drivers of job satisfaction is employee engagement. And that is a totally different, dealing with that challenge is very different now in the hybrid environment. One of the most important things for us as we look into planning for next year is how do we help support and curate intentional togetherness, something that we're talking about every single day. And so I'd love to hear from all of you if you have found new creative solutions on how to help support that, especially in the workplace when people are coming together, whether those people that are coming in know it or not.
So one of the things we're doing, and what I meant by our digital strategies, we've really been focusing in on providing insights to our employees. So letting them know you have a meeting tomorrow. There's 5 people who are planning on being in the office because we have an auto reserve or they've booked seats, et cetera. And so we are giving kind of these insights, which we've found has been working really well to try to promote, gathering and getting into maybe our meeting rooms versus everyone taking the calls on Zoom in the office. So that's one of the things we've been doing.
Awesome. We still have 1 minute and 28 seconds. Who's got a question?
Yeah. Give me 1 second.
Let them finish, James.
Hi, I'm Casey McCarthy. I'm with PepsiCo. And my question is, I think we're missing out on talking about a group of people outside of just associates in the space. When we talk about low utilization, and most of our companies, I think, have reached like the new normal. And let's say you have XX space. Can we think about other ways that we could use that, such as a consumer or a customer focus to make customer experience centers? Or I'm still pushing for like, the ice cream museum in New York. I want like a Cheetos museum or a Doritos one where we're swinging from Cheetos. But like, how can we think about other creative ways to use our space beyond just associate experience? And is that coming up with your companies, or is it something that we should be talking more about?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
but,
you mentioned.
Yeah, we are trying to do something with our access space, but look, the first choice is always let's sublease the space. So it's hard to convince the CFO that we're going to build a museum or client center, maybe because we'll be business related, but we have some ideas to do that. But I don't know about PepsiCo, but we have a bunch of vacant spaces. So we'll be able to do 1 or 2 of those kind of initiatives, but the rest, it's like that space right now. We are hoping that we can consolidate and people will be back, but at the end of the day, it's such a huge portfolio that we'll still have vacant spaces.
I think we've been looking at labs. So are there opportunities where we can bring in, whether it's an M&A activity that we're doing? There's certainly a lot of other challenges that come with that, whether it's firewalls and how do we get them in and secure, so, but it is certainly something that is being discussed in terms of building labs that really could be used by external, but more so as it relates to some of our business units.
And I would just say, I think that's a wonderful question to end on, or almost end on, because I do think it's very of the moment. Like if the purpose to go to the office is you need to do it to be productive, that's a relatively narrow scope of the types of activities that can happen there. If you're saying, maybe that's not it. Maybe it's the employee has to say, my life is enriched in some way for being here. And I believe then it does serve a business purpose because you feel more connected to your company, you're less likely to churn, you're going to be more engaged. And that is even maybe more impactful than was this a, sort of high frequency meeting, which of course could have happened online. Then I think if is this a space that enriches my life? That's a very wide aperture. Soho House enriches people's lives. You know, book club, a young parents group enriches people's lives, and
Cheetos
therefore,
places, yeah.
you know, I think it really opens the door for saying there's a lot of things we can do in these spaces that will be meaningful for employees, that will serve a fundamental business need for Industrious or IBM or, you know, JPMorgan or anyone else, and it might look a lot different than desks in a meeting room.
And we can go back to Ryan Holiday's. A lot of what we're experiencing is the obstacle is the threat that we're trying to eliminate. But if we reframe it that the obstacle is the way to new creative thinking like you're talking about, Casey, then that shifts our mindsets and we can look at this as a new opportunity.
Wow. Thank you for being so generous with your experiences. Let's give him a warm hand. Thank you.